All right, what's going on, guys? So earlier today I made a video about the secret to building 3D delts. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. Basically, the answer to that is having good scapulothoracic mobility and not being so tight and compressed that your scapulas want to stay in close to your spine. So I needed some examples of what it looks like when someone is really compressed and uses really poor form, and Mike always provides shining examples of shitty techniques, so I knew I could turn to him. And there was just so much content available. I thought it might be good just to make a separate video just to really help people build their shoulders up that have maybe tried listening to him and haven't gotten results, because I mean, why would you listen to somebody who doesn't have delts themselves at all? Found a really good video that'll be really useful to contrast the way he lifts with a couple of his gym partners. And you can really see varying degrees of compression and scapulothoracic control, or the ability to actually put tension to their delts. So we're gonna dive into this. I'm gonna break down what is wrong, what we can improve, and what to pay attention to. So first off, let's look at this video. This is a really cool video. So this is the one I was talking about. There's three guys in this. We've got Johnny Shreve, Mike, and then some other dude I don't know. And they're just going to do a couple moves. And this is also something else Dr. Mike always talks about, is not needing a lot of exercise selection for shoulders, when it's that's so far from true. Your shoulders need more angles and variations than pretty much any other body part there is. We used to think back in the day that muscles were kind of contracting in an all or nothing way, but we know that's not true now. They get recruited at different rates. It's not just all or nothing. So I recommend a lot of variety. So we're gonna look at this upright row, and a lot of people do upright rows incorrectly. They do it in a way that's either gonna hurt their shoulders, or they do it in the way where they're not gonna get a lot of delts involved. Let's look at Johnny. Now, Johnny, I would say, is going to be in the middle of the pack between these three guys when it comes to how good his technique is and how compressed he is. So we see a little rib flare. We can see he's kind of retracted here. Nothing's bad with this at all. I don't have any complaints. He's getting some traps. He's getting some delts. That's fine. Really good control on the way down. You can see he kind of makes an effort to keep his elbows from coming too far back and from really squeezing his shoulder blades too much. Now we go to Mike, and notice what we see here, which we did not see, is that shoulder girdle moving all the way up to his chin. Let's look again. You can't see as good from the angle, but you can tell it is not nearly orienting back nearly as much. And I'll have some still frames later for you to get a better visual. So when we get back to Mike again, first thing you'll see is even before the elbows move, it's the arch starts and the orientation of the rib cage starts. So that is a low trap movement. That's not much delts at all. You see how his elbows flare out backwards. Compare that with this dude, who I don't know who this guy is, but he's got the best shape of his delts out of everybody. And look at that, he's really isolating his delts. You don't see crazy rib flare. You don't see crazy downward rotation of the scapula and shoulder girdle. This guy is really getting good isolation on his delts. And maybe he doesn't have the mass of these guys, but he probably doesn't do the amount of drugs these guys does. He probably doesn't care as much about having as much muscle as possible. So that guy's technique was the best, and there's no surprise that he actually has the best shape and best 3D separation that look to his delt. So here we have a freeze frame of Dr. Mike and Johnny, and just look at the difference. You can see Johnny's collarbone is not to his chin. He's not oriented his whole body in an effort to help make the move easier. Mike always talks about you can't listen to your mind-muscle connection. I believe that's because he has zero mind-muscle connection. It's another thing I totally disagree with, because you can't be feeling delts here, at all. And then if we look at him next to the other guy, I mean, look, these are two entirely different exercises. One guy is getting a lot of delts, one guy's getting nothing, and they're both doing the same weight. Mike's fucking weak on this. This isn't a strong position, so he has to compensate in a weird way. So it's when you lift up your arm, we have a certain amount of upward rotation that is necessary, but it's our shoulder that's lifting it up. We want as much shoulder flexion as possible without getting as much upper rotation to help, because it's supposed to just follow the natural rhythm. upper rotation doesn't come from our delts. It comes from our low traps. So when we rely too heavily on upper rotation versus just straight shoulder flexion or abduction, we're going to get a lot more low traps and a lot less delts. So like I said, this looks night and day different. And throughout this whole video, Dr. Mike is telling these two guys what to do, and he's got the shittiest form. He's sitting there giving them technique advice. So this is an exercise that is just stupid in general. I really don't know why Dr. Mike likes this, but he's doing it with terrible form. Arms are way too locked out. He's getting way too much traps. You can see the whole shoulder girdle just moving with that. So this is exactly what he was doing with the upright row. So it's like when he's trying to train his shoulders, he's actually training his low traps and mid back. So I think this is a done movement in general. I don't know why we want to sacrifice weight to get like a little more range of motion in the shortened range. Like, isn't Dr. Mike all about length and range? We can load heavier in the more length and range and then isolate that shorter range with something else, lighter. So I'm not a fan of this at all. And then let's look at his technique tips. Keep your arms as straight as is possible. So that's a horrible tip. It's going to automatically make you recruit more from your traps, rhomboids, those muscle groups. You always want a very slight bend. Terrible advice. Raise the dumbbells by using your shoulders and not any other muscles. That's great advice, but you're not doing that in the absolute slightest bit. So what the fuck, man? Take your own advice. The traps will help. This is 100% okay. Is it 100% okay? From like a injury standpoint, you're probably fine. Is it okay if you want to build your traps? You're fine. Is it okay if you're trying to build really impressive 3D delts? Nah, you're fucking up, man. Consider coming all the way up above your head, or at least to 45 degrees above the horizontal plane. Again, I don't recommend that. I recommend doing that like as something separate. It is super important to control the eccentric on the way down, as loads of growth is stimulated this way. Yes, that's true if you were going down, like loading your delts, and not going down, loading your traps. Again, little traps is okay if you want traps, not if you want to get your delts. Want to train like me? Fuck no. All right, so this is what that exercise would look like with good form that you're trying to keep on your delts. You can see my rib cage doesn't flare. I don't have a whole orientation of my whole shoulder girdle moving backwards, and I'm feeling tons of tension on my actual delts. So this is what it looks like from behind with good technique. You can see my scapula is pretty stationary relatively. I'm not getting a ton of retraction or a ton of downward rotation. I'm trying to reach up. I'm feeling a ton of delts. Now, once I start to lose it, you can literally see the musculature I'm using. That mid-back area I'm taking away from these delts. And that is the reason why, when you look at Dr. Mike, we see a physique that has really overdeveloped mid-back area, upper traps, mid-traps, rhomboids, erectors, because you use those muscles on every single exercise. When you want to be using your delts, you don't. So that's why this looks like that and his delts look the way they do. So what I would do instead is I would go heavy on a lateral, and then I would just isolate the higher range with something like this, the higher range of shoulder flexion. You got to make sure you're not squeezing those shoulder blades hard on this. And you could also go palms down. So I would do that instead of doing that one stupid move. And again, Dr. Mike is pretty limited with his options because he's so compressed. He needs to get what's called dorsal rostral expansion. So the video I made earlier, I covered this in depth. So if you are curious, check that out, because this video will make a little more sense if you see that, and you'll understand why Mike moves the way he does, because he is limited. He could probably improve a little bit, but he'd have to do things that actually change the shape of his rib cage to make significant changes. All right, so here's another example of some shit technique from Dr. Mike. In this, you can see he is just totally compressed in his upper back, which means he's not getting any kind of stretch tension loaded on these front delts. I mean, this just looks like shit when you look at it. Like I can literally see no tension on this. Anytime you flare right away, you're taking away the initial movement from your delts, and you're missing out on the stretch because you're not controlling your rib cage and getting posterior expansion to the back. So this is what it would look like if you wanted to do this move correctly. So this is how he does it, and that just feels like shit. I don't get a ton of delts. Once I close down that stack, now I'm feeling a ton of delts. So what I'll do on this is I actually like lean into it to get a full range of motion, but you could also just do more of the stretched version right here. But you can see I'm keeping that stack. I'm going back as far as I can with the arms without sacrificing that posterior expansion. So I'm getting tons of tension on my delts, getting none when I do that. Getting some, but not getting much. All right, so this is the rest of the video that Mike was doing with those two guys. And you can kind of see on here as well, immediately as soon as he lifts, we see the whole arching of the back, the whole rib cage coming up and back. You can look at the hand position. He's not like really trying to push forward. He's getting upward rotation with a deduction when we want upward rotation with more protraction. Now, you can see Johnny, he's a little compressed, but he's got that muscular control, that awareness. You can see he's got a little delts. He's able to kind of like muscle his way through it at the top and get some delts out of it. He's not super compressed. And this guy with the good delts, the smaller guy, he's got the best form on this as well. You can see that scapula gliding outward as he's upwardly rotating. Yeah, this guy's definitely got the best technique, and we've got some stills on this as well. All right, so here's Mike versus Johnny. And again, look at this crazy arch. Not nearly as significant on Johnny. Look at the arm and shoulder position. His arms are reaching forward. His shoulder blades are so far back he can't really get that forward position. So this is much better for Johnny. And then again, when we look at him and this guy, totally different. Very neutral spine. You can see his scapula all the way out here. Dr. Mike's is squished down low. You wouldn't be able to see that. So definitely the best technique by far was this smallest guy. He had the best delts too. So when it comes to Dr. Mike, I would not listen to any advice he has at all when it comes to workout technique. If you want to hear his take on shitty design studies that will really have no impact at all on your ability to grow muscle, then go for it. I'm sure he's good at that. But do not listen to advice when it comes to technique, because that's not what his background is, and his physique shows that he does not know what he's talking about. So I highly recommend checking out the video I made about how to develop 3D delts. I'm not saying I've got the craziest delts in the world, but they're definitely a strong point for me. Here I am at the Excalibur a couple years ago, competing at 191 pounds, going against the heavyweight in the overall, who was 220 pounds, ended up getting like 8th at Nationals a couple weeks later. And you can see my delt is just a standout part for me, where it used to not be at all. I put some before and afters on the other video I made, and I had shit delts before, so they are not genetic at all. So I recommend checking that out, or you're welcome to keep listening to this guy. Whatever you want. All right, thanks. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please let me know. I hope this was useful. All right.